I'm State Representative Janine Nodder, in the state of New Hampshire, and you're watching Chattin with Janine, the Zoom edition. We're in episode number 5 on the summer mini-series with my brother, historian Lee Rash, also a United States Marine. We're following the Marines in the Pacific during World War II. And this week, my brother will take us to the island of Saipan. So welcome, Lee, and thanks for being on the show again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, putting up with me all this time.
Oh, well, you know, I got all these decades of practice. Hey, you know, I've been putting these on YouTube, and we picked up a fan. Guess who's been watching our show? Another a Marine that we know and love, Uncle Harry.
Oh, Uncle Harry. Oh,
shout out to
Uncle Harry that guy.
And our cousin Linda.
Oh, very nice.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi, Uncle Harry.
So you didn't give us any homework last week.
I did. You failed to do your homework. Okay, well, I'll remind you when I get there.
Oh, okay. Would
you like to go to the Pacific at this point?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm going to be sitting here trying to remember homework assignment. I don't remember homework assignment.
All right. Well, we all know about, stuff out of the way. We all know about December 7th, 1941, where the Japanese hit the United States. There we go. And the day after, President Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war, the day of infamy. So now what do we do? After December 7th, the Japanese are running wild all over the Pacific. We are losing place after place after place, and President Roosevelt wants to hit back. How do we do that? It's about 4,000 miles from Honolulu to Tokyo. The next closest place that we have, Midway Island, is about 2,500 miles away. And then the next closest place after that is Guam. Guam's about 1,600 miles from Tokyo, but Guam's under attack. And by December 10th, Guam is gone. How are we going to hit the Japanese? Well, we've got a Navy captain by the name of Francis Lowe, who got some information, some suggestions from his staff, said, well, why don't we put B-25 Mitchell bombers on aircraft carriers and fly them close to the coast of Japan? So that was put together. Army Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, here he is right here. And they successfully do that. They fly these planes, B-25 Mitchell bombers, off of an aircraft carrier, which has never been done before up to this point. Now, these are pretty big planes. They're 53 feet long. They're 67 and a half feet wide from wingtip to wingtip. And when you compare that to the aircraft carrier planes, the F-4F Wildcat had a wingspan of 38 feet. So you can see how much this is almost twice as big. How can you do such a thing? Well, they managed to get it done April the 18th, 1942. And here is a photograph.
There it is.
Mitchell bomber flying off of the carrier USS Hornet. They wanted to get within 400 miles of the Japanese coast, but they were spotted at 650. So they almost scrubbed the mission. But Doolittle says, no, let's go. They take off. And after they bomb Tokyo, the idea is that they're going to continue flying westward to the coast of China. One of the planes didn't even try that. They flew straight north to Vladivostok, Russia, where the plane was interned because Russia was not at war with Japan. So that's the only time that we're able to hit the Japanese on the Japanese home islands in 1942. And it's an impossible task in 1943 as well. Now, in 1943, the Allies are hitting the Germans. They're doing it with B-17s. Here's one here. And B-24s, move you up a little bit. There's a B-24 over here. These bombers have a range of 1,600 miles. So not a big problem in Europe because from London to Berlin is 680 miles. So that's well within the range of these planes. But how are you going to do that in the Pacific? All right. Guam. Come on. There we go. Guam is 1,600 miles from Tokyo. So here's Tokyo up here. Here's Guam down here. But we lost Guam. December the 10th, 1941. It's gone. So how are you going to hit Tokyo? Try it again with aircraft carriers? Now, that's kind of risky as well. Oh my gosh. We don't want this.
Uh-oh. Technical difficulties.
Yeah. We want to come back over here. There we go.
There we go.
But Saipan is 1,200 miles from Tokyo. One problem is we don't have Saipan. 1943, this is still Japanese territory. And even if we had Saipan in 1943 or Guam, we don't have an airplane that has the range to go all the way to Tokyo and back. Remember, the B-17 has a range of 1,600 miles. But there's a new plane coming out in 1944, the B-29. Here is a B-29 right here. B-29 has a range of 6,000 miles. Now, this plane had been under production and under concept since the beginning of the war, and the United States wanted this plane very badly. So they pushed the Boeing company very hard to get this plane operational and ready. And so by May 1944, the B-29, according to the Boeing company, is ready.
That's a big jump from 1,600 mile range to 6,000 miles.
Yeah.
Wow.
This plane is not exactly ready. There's an awful lot of flaws in this plane. They have a tremendous amount of maintenance problems with these engines, but for the most part, they work. And so if we could take Saipan and the Northern Marianas Islands, we're going to be within range to bomb the Japanese home islands. So that is the reason why the United States wanted to take these islands in the first place. Okay. The invasion fleet is put together in Hawaii, and it leaves Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, on June the 5th, 1944. Does that sound a little familiar? June the 5th, 1944.
Yes.
That was supposed to be D-Day in Europe, but because of bad weather, it got postponed. And D-Day is June the 6th, 1944. So we've got this huge big deal that we celebrate every year, D-Day in Europe. This one gets overlooked, and it's pretty much just as important as D-Day in Europe. This invasion force is going to consist of 2 Marine divisions, the 2nd Marine Division and the 4th Marine Division, and the Army's 27th Infantry Division. And this 27th Infantry Division had been a National Guard division from New York, state of New York, prior to the war. Here is the commander, the overall commander of the invasion force. This is Lieutenant General Howling Smith of the United States Marine Corps. And this guy had a reputation for being no nonsense and has a very, very short fuse. So bad that people, instead of calling him Howling Smith, he was referred to as Howling Mad Smith. It wouldn't take much to tick this guy off. And there's going to be quite a controversy during the campaign in Saipan. Howling Smith will fire the Army commander of the 27th Infantry Division. And that'll have repercussions that will last beyond the war, inter-service rivalry. Okay, the bombardment of Saipan begins on June the 13th. Actually, the Navy had been bombing them earlier than that, but now you've got battleships in action. And during this 2-day time period between the time the Marines land and the Navy is there shelling it, the Navy has thrown 165,000 shells onto the island of Saipan. The battleships are firing 16-inch shells. 2,400 of them are going to be hurled at Saipan. How big is a 16-inch shell? 16 inches in diameter, right? Well, here are 16-inch shells.
Those are bigger than me.
Yeah. These things are huge. And a modern battleship can throw these things up to 30 miles with pinpoint accuracy. Problem is, we didn't have any forward observers on the island itself to tell them exactly where to pinpoint these. So they're just randomly firing these all over the island. And you would think that the Japanese military would have been obliterated with all of this. But that just seemed to never turn out to be the case on any of the Pacific Islands.
They were dug in?
Ask me again?
Because they were dug in?
Oh, absolutely. The Japanese were excellent at digging in tunnels and blockhouses and pillboxes all over these islands. So June the 15th is going to be D-Day in the Pacific. And the Marines are going to land. And Saipan and the neighboring island of Tinian will be captured during this campaign. A month later, Guam, which is south of Saipan and Tinian, will be recaptured and returned.
All right, got it back.
Okay, now here are some guys that are pretty famous.
Yeah.
These are Navajo Code Talkers. The Marine Corps specifically recruited these guys to talk on the radio. So I'm sure you've seen the movie The Wind Talkers and a few others. And these guys are very dedicated Marines. They had to come up with their very own code because there are words in the Navajo language that didn't exist. Well, I'll put it the other way. Words in modern warfare that didn't exist in the Navajo language. Like, how do you refer to a tank? Well, they used the Navajo word for turtle to refer to a tank. So they had to make some other adjustments to come up with this. And this actually was not a unique situation. So the Marines are using the Navajo, but Native American languages had been used even in World War I. And during World War II, the U.S. Army was using Native American languages. Lakota, the Teton Sioux, Meskwaki, Mohawk, Comanche, Tlingit, Hopi, Cree, Crow, few others to less extent, but they're all being used during World War II. So these guys get to be the most famous. They're with the Marines. And they were active on Saipan in a very large way. So June 15th at 0700, now we're going to land the Marines. And here's one of the type of landing craft that's used. This is an LVT, landing vehicle for tanks and treaded vehicles. There we go. Landing vehicle tracked. This happens to be a Jeep coming off.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
All right. By nightfall, we've got a beachhead. And that night, the Japanese attempt to counterattack. So the Japanese would often do this, a desperate move. They do what they called a bonsai attack, try to shove the Marines back off the island. The next day, the Army is going to land, 27th Infantry Division. There we go. And the Japanese counterattack on June the 18th as well, trying to push the Americans away from the airfields. And this is something that the Americans wanted very desperately, the airfields. Now, the commander of the Japanese forces on Saipan, he is going to organize his troops towards the center of the island, and they're anchored on the highest point of the island. It's called Mount Tapachau. And as the Americans attempt to take this, they're going to take on many, many casualties. And this is going to be referred to as Hell's Pocket and Purple Heart Ridge. So you know what a Purple Heart is?
Yeah, that's obvious. Right? Yeah.
So here's a photograph of Purple Heart Ridge. Okay, now Saito gets to the point where he's getting rather desperate. And so he tells the civilians on the island, oops, I got to back it up here. All right, well, I'll get back to Saito in a minute. This was your homework assignment. Guy Gabaldon.
I don't remember my homework assignment.
Okay. Guy Gabaldon is a Mexican-American, grew up here in East Los Angeles.
Oh, now I remember. I remember you saying that guy from East Los Angeles, East LA. Yeah.
Now, his father had abandoned him and his mother when he was young. And during the 1930s, he's living in this kind of rundown apartment with his mother, and she gets deathly ill and goes to the hospital. So he's living by himself. There was a movie made out of this. It's called From Hell to Eternity. It's an awful lot of Hollywood conjecture in there. So you know how those guys are. But at any rate, there's a bit of truth to it, to the movie. And Gabaldon is going to end up living in the home of Japanese Americans, where he absolutely falls in love with the family, and they teach him how to speak Japanese. So in World War II, Gabaldon is going to end up in the United States Marine Corps, and his first action in combat will be on Saipan Island, where he uses his language skills to speak to Japanese soldiers and Japanese civilians on the island to get them to understand that you're not going to survive this. How about surrender? And contrary to what you've been told, we're going to treat you very well. We're not going to eat you. And the civilians on Saipan were told all kinds of strange things about what the Americans would do if they were captured. And Gabaldon is going to earn the title of the Pied Piper of Saipan. And he's actually able to get about 1,500 people to surrender, both soldiers and civilians. And he'll be awarded the Silver Star for his action on Saipan. Later on, after this movie comes out, his Silver Star is going to be elevated to the Navy Cross. And here's what the Navy Cross looks like.
Oh, that's cool looking. I like how it has that ship in the middle.
Okay. July the 6th. The Japanese are getting very, very desperate at this point. And General Saito assumes that the Japanese civilians on the island are going to assist in fighting the Americans. So he tells them, There's no longer any distinction between civilians and troops, and it would be better for you to join in the attack with sharpened bamboo spears than to be captured by these American devils. So at dawn on July the 7th, with 12 men carrying a huge red rising sun flag, there's an all-out bonsai attack against the Americans. Here they come. And this would be typical on these Pacific islands when the Japanese get to the last straw. Rather than surrender, they're going to die in battle. Now, here's a guy that did not die in battle. Captain Sake Obo. He and 46 other soldiers, Japanese soldiers, survived the last bonsai charge. And they go into the jungle, try to escape capture by the Americans. And he's going to hold out until December the 1st, 1945.
Wow.
Remember the Japanese surrender? In August 1945, officially September the 3rd, 1945. So this is 3 months later.
They didn't
This
know
guy finally gives up.
Yeah, so they didn't know the war was over?
No. There'll be some other Japanese soldiers on other islands, such as Luzon in the Philippines,
Yeah.
that will continue to hold out for a long time. The last Japanese soldier in the Philippines surrendered in 1972.
That's a long time. I remember reading about that story.
Yeah. Well, they've been told it's complete dishonor to you and your family to surrender to the enemy.
And that's why they were so hard on the American POWs?
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, one other tragedy about Saipan is that the Japanese civilians that lived on the island. Now, Japan had gained access to the islands, Northern Marianas, following World War I. They had been German possessions. And because Japan came into World War I, they actually didn't do any fighting in Europe, but they did assist the Allies in the Pacific to take over German islands. So that's how the Japanese got these islands. And they built up Japan after World War I as a colony, and a lot of Japanese civilians moved there. And as the Americans are coming to the islands, all of these civilians are told horrendous stories about what the Americans would do to them if they were to surrender or be captured by the Americans. So a lot of the Japanese civilians, rather than surrender to the Americans, they chose to jump off these cliffs.
That's sad.
Yeah, commit suicide.
The water's so beautiful too. It's so blue.
Yeah. Saipan today actually is an American commonwealth. Saipan and Tinian. The Northern Marianas Islands chose to remain territories of the United States after World War II. So now it's considered what we call a commonwealth, just like Puerto Rico and Samoa. Okay, here is the cost. Let me put this down here. Almost 14,000 American casualties, more than twice that many Japanese. Americans killed and missing on Saipan and Tinian, about 3,500. Japanese killed in action, 24,000. This was very common as well. You'd see huge, huge numbers of Japanese killed. Very, very few captured. 5,000 of these 24,000 Japanese killed were suicides.
Rather than be captured. Wow.
Right, right. So this is going to be one of the factors that's going to go into the decision on whether or not President Truman is going to drop the atomic bomb. Now, there are an awful lot of very legitimate reasons why the United States should not have dropped the bomb and why the United States should have dropped the bomb. So when I teach World War II in my classes, I present both those sides without telling you what I think. Now, what do you think?
Well,
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, what do your students think?
Sorry?
What do your students think? That's interesting.
They're split. I get usually an equal number of students that are for it and against it. And there's, legitimate reasons on both sides.
Yeah.
Would the Japanese have surrendered without the atomic bomb? There are some prominent Americans that would say, yes, they would have. Such as Dwight Eisenhower. There's one. So, okay, now I'm not gonna put myself on either side, just offering that there are arguments on both sides. The fact is that we did it. According to Winston Churchill, you didn't even have to think about it.
Well, we have about just a few minutes left.
Okay.
Here, go ahead.
After we take Saipan and Tinian, we're going to develop those airfields for American use. And the island of Tinian is where the B-29 carrying the first atomic bomb to drop on Hiroshima takes off from Tinian. So perhaps you've heard the story of the Enola Gay. Yeah. All right, go ahead. I'm open for questions.
Well, this is a dumb question. The B, like B-52, B-17, B-29, does the B stand for bomber?
It does.
Okay, I just wanted to check and make sure.
Yeah. A B is for bomber, an F is for a fighter, an A is for an attack aircraft.
What about an RF?
RF?
RF 101. That was from Vietnam. That was fast forward, but.
Okay. The F-101, that is a Navy fighter bomber.
Okay.
I believe that's the kind of plane that Senator John McCain had flown.
I don't know. Actually, I'm going to stand up because I have a picture because somebody gave me a book about it. I work with somebody who worked on these planes, RF-101 Voodoo units in combat. So he gave me this book because there's a piece in here about Colonel Charles E. Shelton, and I knew his family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's.
Shelton's Air Force. So, okay.
Yes. Let's see. And I don't know what else I had for questions. But it was just interesting that I never thought about the planes before. Like how far they could fly. So this is all very interesting because it's something I never thought about. I usually, when I read about World War II, I'm usually reading more about the war in Europe. So this is a good education, and so thank you. And I think we're on our 5th week of taping this mini series, and I know next week I have a different guest taking a break, and then there's our timer. We have Iwo Jima still to go to, and Okinawa, and then we're going to do one more special with the CAP Marines. What do you say, CAP Marines or CAP Marines?
Yeah, Combined Action Platoons.
Combined Action.
CAP Marines, yeah.
And
I belong to that association, and we have a Facebook group. So I mentioned it to the guys, and they were all excited about it. So.
Oh, I did have one more question. That Navajo Code Talker movie, was Nicolas Cage in that movie?
Yeah, the Wind Talkers. Yeah, there's some Hollywood in there as well. There were no such orders for anybody to shoot the Navajos rather than let the Japanese capture them.
And then,
in fact, there was a Navajo Code Talker that was captured by the Japanese. he did not reveal the code, but nobody was going to assassinate him to keep the Japanese from capturing him. So that's a bunch of Hollywood. When you watch a war movie, remember what the motivation is for the movie producers. Their motivation is to entertain you so that you will buy the movie. Their motivation is not necessarily to educate you. I will commend Steven Spielberg. I think he does a great job in educating people. But here again, be cautious. He has to sell his movies, so it has to be entertaining.
And just another shout out to Justin, who's 3 miles up the road in Merrimack TV studio running the show for us. And I'm making him do the homework with us. So do we have homework for the next installment?
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Well, next installment, we're going to go over Iwo Jima. So, yeah, I'll give you some homework on that.
Okay.
Why do the Americans want Iwo Jima in the first place?
Well, I have that book. I can read that real quick. Flags of Our Fathers. I think the answer's in there.
I believe James Bradley does explain that. I will also reveal some interesting information when we get into this. There was a new investigation done in 2016 that gives us some interesting information that might be a little contrary to what you thought about Iwo Jima.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to that episode. And I know you can't be here next week, but enjoy your time away. And Justin, thank you for all you do up there. I'll see you in a minute to get you this is the little flash drive. This is how I put it on YouTube. I have 2. So he has 1 and I have 1, and then we switch, and then I can put the show on YouTube and it's ready to go. So thank you for watching, and we'll be back, my brother and I. So thank you, Lee. Thanks for joining me again, and give everyone a hug for me.
Will do. Thank you.